Another potential problem that we see with aid is I think increasingly you'll start to see a trend where aid money is provided to help developing countries adapt to climate change. And we think that helping developing countries adapt to climate change is not only crucial, and it's not only a matter of justice, because after all, it's the developed countries that cause the bulk of CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but it's the poorer nations that are bearing the brunt of this. But our position is that it is really unfair to be taking this money out of a long-standing commitment to provide development aid in its own right. We see money for adaptation as absolutely crucial, but for us it really is additional resources. It should come as well. It should come as well as aid money, not at the expense of it. And it really comes from a compensatory principle that developed countries, have a duty to compensate developing countries for their excessive emissions. And I would hasten to add, I think there are also really practical benefits that could be had from providing this additional adaptation funding, not least because developing countries then feel they have a real stake in the international climate change negotiations, and they have a real reason to come to the table and sit down and engage as constructively as they can. So, I think from our point of view, there is an issue around the quantity of aid, around the purpose for which aid is used. And I think there's also a need, not just for more aid, but as I'm sure my counterparts will say, for better quality aid as well. Aid that isn't adaptation, but also aid that's in debt relief, aid that does not come with harmful conditions attached. What we have at the moment is a situation where DFID has a really progressive policy of not attaching harmful economic policy conditions, such as privatisation, such as trade liberalisation, to the bilateral aid that it is, which is really good. What we also have is a situation where the UK government is a large contributor, and in fact has just increased its contribution substantively to the World Bank, which is a good organisation in many respects, but is also an organisation that has made insufficient progress in combating conditionality. Just to give an example from Zambia, as you would expect, of the harmful impact that World Bank conditions can have on a country. What you've got in Zambia, up until the 1990s, was a copper mining sector that was heavily state-run. There was a state-owned mining company that operated the bulk of it. What you then had on top of that was the IMF and the World Bank coming in, attaching a condition to aid, first of all, which said that Zambia must look at the options for privatisation. Then in 1996, it must privatise. This condition was repeated again in 1997 by the IMF and the World Bank, again in 1999 by the IMF and the World Bank. Zambia, as you can tell, was quite resistant to this and was resisting the notion of privatisation. Then finally, in 1999, it was made a condition for Zambia to access debt relief through the highly indebted poor countries initiative. And at that stage, the former finance minister in Zambia said to me, and I quote, "We have no option." They went ahead with it, and whilst in some ways it's been a success, it has meant an extremely low level of revenue flowing back to the Zambian government. Zambia has got one of the lowest tax regimes in the world for the mining companies, and that is largely due to IMF World Bank conditionality, but also to the action of UK companies. But it's also meant environmental degradation and a very poor record for workers' rights as well. That's just one of the illustrations and one of the problems that conditionality has caused. And so, I guess what we're really calling for is coherence within different policies, that it attaches the same progressive policies that it does to bilateral aid as it does to the aid it gives multilaterally, and that it really seeks to ensure, when it gives this money to the World Bank, it's using this money in the most effective way that it can, and it really, to be quite crude about it, it's getting the maximum negotiating capacity, and it's getting the maximum concessions, it's getting the maximum agreement from the World Bank for the amount of money that it's putting in. And it really comes back to this issue of quality, quality aid for developing countries and for the people within them. I think whilst we do need coherence within DFID, we also need coherence out with DFID and within the UK government. The UK government does really well, I think, on this in several respects, but I think there's also an opportunity for a bit of joined up thinking between departments as well. When I say departments, I'm talking kind of really about Dymond, Department for Business, Enterprise and Regulatory Reform, because I think there's a sense in which DFID is doing a lot of really good work alleviating poverty in developing countries on the one hand. However, there's a real danger that UK companies in the same countries are really actually undermining some of the efforts that DFID is making on the ground. And that, to a large extent, is because they're not regulated sufficiently in the UK, and you can't rely exclusively on host country governments to regulate them. And I think I'd just like to illustrate that and say a few words about the importance of corporate regulation within the freedom of trade, using Zambia as a case study, and then say a few words about the other component of trade that I mentioned at the beginning, which is looking at kind of international trade rules and some of the issues around those. But first I'm going to take a sip of water because I'm really thirsty.
Could you pass that to the people?
Yes, and pass water to my actual colleagues. So clearly, I think there are kind of complex interlinkages between aid and trade, and we need to make sure that the two are working together. And if they don't work together, there is a bigger danger that the really good work that it does can inadvertently be undermined by the work of other departments. I'd just like to really briefly talk about the example of Zambia's copper sector in this respect. And this example, I think, illustrates the need for stronger corporate regulation at the UK level. What you have in Zambia is a highly privatised copper sector, and in fact, the largest copper mining company in Zambia is majority owned by a UK company, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange. It's headquartered in London, and it's got not only London-based, but also Scottish-based investors as well. Unfortunately for Zambia, what we found is that Zambia's copper has brought the country really minimal benefits, and really has come with many unintended, many disadvantageous consequences as well. Zambia is highly rich in copper. It's got a large amount of high-quality copper, and as you may know, commodity prices, including copper, are at all-time highs. So what you'd expect in this situation is for Zambia to be making a high and handsome profit from these booming copper prices. In actual fact, Zambia remains one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. It's got an average life expectancy of 37. Someone born in Victorian England has got more of a chance of living to their 40s than does someone born in Zambia today. It's also a country where 1 in 3 children are unable to attend primary school. So whatever statistic you choose to use, Zambia unfortunately is rich in natural resources but poor and has bad poverty indicators. One of the reasons for this is World Bank conditionality and privatisation that happened within Zambia, but it's also the actions of multinational companies within that. So what you had in Zambia was a situation where privatisation was repeatedly made a condition of World Bank IMF aid. You then had a situation in which many companies, including the UK multinational Anglo-American, came in and were able to negotiate with this in mind. The result was that Zambia has one of the lowest tax regimes in the world. The IMF says that the average tax regime, the average mineral royalty for developing countries is between 5 to 10%, and some as high as 30%. Zambia's is 0.6%. Another interesting statistic, the headline corporate tax rate in Zambia meant to be 25%. IFC study in 2004 showed that the copper mining sector had an effective tax rate of 0. So what you've got is UK companies, not only UK companies, but as I say, UK companies are the largest players, giving little back to the Zambian government in terms of revenue. At the same time, they're employing contract workers on what we calculate to be a quarter of the basic needs basket, so a quarter of what the average Zambian family needs to survive on for a month. And when I say basic, it's really basic. It includes basically, a house over your head, it includes food. It doesn't include the price of education, it doesn't include the price of basic healthcare, and they're not even getting, they're getting a quarter of that. So, whilst these people are grateful for the jobs that they're getting, clearly their terms and conditions leave a lot to be desired. And it's also a